Hey everyone, it's Liz. So this is going to be a video in place of the live stream on YouTube tonight, which there was some technical difficulties, so I chose to cancel the live stream and instead we're just going to do this recording. So apologies if you were affected by that mishap. So jumping right in. So this is the week 5, which is modeling a floral ring. So while we are not modeling the exact ring on screen, you're certainly welcome to do that. Actually, if you were to do the signet ring and then combine it with the floral ring from tonight, you kind of have this style. But what I did want to show you is that these are the kind of floral elements that you will want to sort of have in your mind when I'm walking you through this particular class. So jumping right in. So as per usual, this class will be a design process guide that I will show you how to do this ring. However, this is not a super basic class. If you have never opened Tinkercad before, if you are not familiar with this interface, please be sure to take my Introduction to Tinkercad class first, which is also on my YouTube channel, where I go over the basic stuff like rotating, basic objects, really everything that you need to know to get up to speed with this class and any of the prior 4 classes. So a few things about this ring. So this is the design that I came up with for this class. However, unlike prior classes, this design will often or will likely look very different for you than it does here. This is a very unique class, very different than my prior sessions in that I'm going to give you some early guidance as to the sort of process for how we build this ring. But then I'm mostly going to be showing you some different tips and tricks and some different things to think about for how to build all of these individual elements, which are really very customizable. So this is going to be sort of an open-ended class where you can kind of follow along, but also feel free to sort of check out just the different demos that I give you, and then feel free to also skip to the end if you wanted to see how to finish this up, if you've decided that you're really going to like go into your own design work. So that being said, the way that this class will work, or the process of modeling this ring, we're really going to start by defining the ring size. And so in this case, I will be doing a ring size 6, which is my ring size, and that's a 16.5 millimeter diameter. If you know you are a different ring size, I have all the sizes listed in the description of this class, so definitely just go over and check that out so that you can determine what the dimension is for your ring size. You're welcome to follow along here if you don't know. It's a really easy thing to modify that once you do know your ring size. So one sort of disclaimer I will give before we jump in is that these details, so I did the exact thing that I always warn people not to do, and I built this entire ring before I checked it in Shapeways to see if there were any areas that were too small or sort of too free floating to be manufactured, and in fact there are. So some of these details are actually far daintier than you would be able to successfully print or cast. So I will try and give you some of that guidance as we go. Okay, so jumping right in. So we're going to create a new design and name your design. So floral ring. Great. So the very first thing that we're going to do, and while this is a pre-recorded class, I am going to run this as though it's a live stream. So meaning that I will demo something, I will then pause and sort of walk it back, and then we'll do it again together. So you can really just listen along. And again, there's only so much, there's only a few steps that I'm really going to be showing you, and then the rest is really more showing you how to build different concepts, how to approach the modeling process in different ways. It's less about steps. So jumping right in, the first thing that we're going to do is grab a cylinder hole and add it to the work plane. So that is by selecting the cylinder hole and dropping it roughly in the center of the work plane. So then the first things that we'll do to this, and you can just watch at this point, is rotate this 90 degrees and increase the number of sides to be 64. And when I do that, you can see that I'll just bring it back down. You can see that right now these this circular edge is actually very faceted. So we want to increase the number of those mesh faces or those faceted flat faces to 64, and you get the appearance of a much smoother diameter. Let me just show that again, and you can go ahead and follow along now as well. So that is grabbing a cylinder from the Basic Shapes menu, dropping it roughly to the center of the work plane. And then the two things that you will do to this cylinder is rotate it by 90 degrees and then increase the number of sides to be 64. Okay. So then at this point, we have to make a decision about the thickness or the width of the ring. So I'm actually going to go with like 6 millimeters, actually 5 millimeters, to make this a kind of a chunky ring, not too crazy. I will warn you that if you decide you want to go something like much higher, your ring size will have to be increased. So the thicker or the wider the band is, the higher, the larger the ring size, just to be able to sort of fit on your hand. So I would just say probably 5 millimeters is about where you want it to be. Unless you know what your larger ring size is in a bigger band. So at this point, you will have just resized the width, and then you need to go ahead and actually size the ring itself, the cylinder hole itself. And so, like I said, my ring size is a 6, and that is 16.5 millimeters. So I'm going to change my cylinder hole to be 16.5 by 16.5. And then I'm just going to quickly undo that, and you can follow along. So we were here with our cylinder hole rotated and the number of sides increased. We are now going to set the width of it to be maybe a maximum of 5, and then set the actual ring size itself. So 16.5 in my case, perhaps different in your case. Okay, so the last thing that we're going to do, which really kind of concludes the actual steps, is we're going to lock this. And so now what we have here is we essentially have a guide for what you're going to be using to build your geometry and add your details around. And so if you remember the last ring I had on screen, it was really just a bunch of floating floral sort of objects colliding together to form like a solid ring band. So you always have the option, if you don't love that more like cut out floating floral look, if you feel like it's too delicate or you have a lot of very small details and you need to sort of ground them and anchor them on something, you're always welcome to make a thin little band using this technique, or really any of the other ring classes on my YouTube channel. You could follow any of those to make a basic band, but basically you would just take a solid cylinder, you would size it to include the wall thickness, and then you would cut away this object from it. So you always have that option. But what I'm going to really now show you is steps to expedite the process of adding a lot of fine details, and actually how some different ideas on how to make those fine details. And so you really at this point just use the next few steps that I give you as guidance and as inspiration. But really, how you shape your floral objects is really completely up to you. I'm just going to give you some tips and some tricks. So go ahead and feel free to follow along so that you can, start to set yourself up and decide if you want to, fast forward and see how it ends or jump to a next step. That's sort of the beauty of this being a recording, I guess, is that you can kind of take it piecemeal. So that ring, the very first ring that I showed you on screen, all those floral details are made up of existing shapes. or anything from the shapes menu. And so I really love this technique because it shows you, it sort of challenges you to resize, reproportion these very geometric shapes to create more complex details, to really transform the shapes. So what do I mean by that? So the first thing that I mean, let's just go with the very basics. Using a sphere. So most of these shapes that I've created have started with a sphere. And so this obviously looks nothing like a flower petal at the moment, but this is sort of what I mean by using these shapes to transform them. So I'm just going to really start to flatten this out. And I'm just grabbing just the nodes and I'm kind of free forming them myself into a shape that I think looks kind of like a floral like petal. So that's like a good proportion that I want, but obviously this needs to be way, 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 way smaller. So as you're starting to build these shapes, do keep in mind that the typical tolerances, if you're going to be producing this in metal on shapeways, the wall thickness, the minimum wall thickness that you're going to want is 1 millimeter. I would recommend even going a little bit bigger than that in some cases, especially if you have like free kind of free floating items. So you're just going to want to kind of keep an eye on this grid right here. So a way to check what your current size is of any of these items is just to click on that and it shows you the dimensions. So in this case, this petal is 7 millimeters in length and 3 in width. So that's like a pretty big petal. You can just see it in relationship to this. Like that's a really sort of large item. So I can really go a lot smaller than that. And so in this case, I'm using the top view in this navigational cube to orient myself so that I can see like the very straight top view. I'm also using this switch to flat view toggle to really flatten my image so that it looks more like a sketch. And now I can kind of position this. So this is obviously, these are millimeter increments right here. These like small light blue boxes are millimeters. The darker blue box is a centimeter. And I can start to really size this down to be a much smaller petal, keeping in mind that 1 millimeter measurement. So you can see right now when I'm dragging this, it's snapping in these very large jumps. I would like a sort of smoother motion or dragging motion. And to do that, I go down here to the snap grid. And you can see that it says 1 millimeter. So we just said that these little boxes right here are 1 millimeter. And so that means that anytime you do a motion, you use the arrows, or you drag these nodes to resize, that it's happening in 1 millimeter jumps. So to change that, you could really drop it down. So I'm actually going to change it down to 0.1 millimeter jumps. So this dragging motion is going to be so much smoother than it was before. And I've got more sort of flexibility and freedom. So I'm just going to kind of start with a 3 millimeter petal, about 1.5 millimeters wide. Let's see what our thickness is. So let's just start with 1 millimeter and see what that looks like. So areas like this, obviously this is 1 millimeter, but this gets skinnier. This can be acceptable. This will likely get flagged as being too thin, but because it's attached to a thicker area, it will likely be okay. I might actually just make this a little thicker just to avoid having what happened last time when I did my first ring for this class. So I might just actually elongate this slightly. So this might be like one of my bigger floral designs. So we have one petal. So now what do we do? So this is really where you start to combine these objects to build the shape. So in this case, and I know I told you that I was gonna do something, demo it, and then reverse and then do it again. In this, I'm really just giving you some ideas. So I'm not gonna go through that process because I do have quite a few different tips to show you. Once we get more to the finishing steps, I will sort of step it back and walk through a bit more slowly. But this is really just to give you an idea of how you can be creating these shapes. So what I've done is I've got one petal right here. I'm going to go ahead and take another sphere, drop it on the work plane, and I'm just going to hold shift, scale it down, and this is going to be the center of my flower that the petals will array out of. right there. So you can kind of see where we're going with this, right? So to get these petals, one thing I'm going to do is I'm going to start by actually rotating this petal a little bit so that it's not perfectly flat and perfectly kind of cookie cutter. I'm going to rotate it in that perspective so you can see it sort of rotated, like tilted away from the center. I'm also going to give it a little bit of a lift so that, again, it's not just sitting totally flat. You could also, you know what, let's actually go, maybe we tilt down this time. We tilt it like it's a flower that's opened up and is sort of dying and the petals are drooping. Yeah, let's try that. So that might be a little bit too much. So this is like really the process that you're going to go through to create these little objects. So once I am happy with the position, I am going to duplicate that petal, which is up here in the corner. I saw it blink once. That shows me that it's duplicated. I can also use my arrows to move the other one, just verify that I've got two. So now I'm going to rotate this. And I'm not really that concerned with doing it precisely because seriously, what flower is like a cookie cutter, right? Like they're all a little bit different. I am also at this point maybe going to modify the rotation a little bit so that each of my petals feel a little different. I'm going to duplicate that one again. This one, I'm actually going to make it a little skinnier and a little shorter. Actually, no, a little longer. So I'm just basically trying to create petals that are differentiated from each other. And this one might be a little bit, maybe actually lift it a little bit. So then I go put this sort of in place. I rotate it, use my arrows or my mouse. And you can see this sort of process, this sort of back and forth push and pull process of starting to build these elements. Lots of rotation, looking at it from different angles. Maybe that was a little bit too much. And I'm not too concerned about what's happening down here because I'm going to be slicing a lot of this off, which you'll see what I mean later. So, okay, so I kind of like that. I'm just going to adjust this briefly. But again, we're not looking for like perfection, right? We're looking for a little variance. So now you can individually do more of those petals, or you have kind of a repeat going. So you can just duplicate this little set, move it into place. Maybe you duplicate this little set, move it into place. And maybe I actually decide, you know what, I really want to play with the spacing a little bit and not make these like perfect, not make them so dense perhaps. Actually, I think I probably need another petal in there. I'm just going to duplicate this one, make it a little bit smaller, make it a little bit skinnier, and pop it into position right there. So I've got kind of an irregular little flower, just like that. So once you're happy with that, go ahead and select those objects and you can, so I did that by dragging a bounding box around all of them to grab them and then group them. And you can verify that it's been grouped by when you click one part and you drag, the whole thing will move. It will also just show up as one shape as compared to 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 shapes. So okay, so a nice thing here that I just want to show you, which if you were in my last class, you saw this work plane modification. So scrolling out for a second. So this is the work plane. The work plane is like the ground. The ground has gravity. So when you grab an item and you drop it, it falls on the ground. If you would like to temporarily change where that ground is, you can use this work plane tool up here. And you can now place this where you would like your object to go. So I basically, let me just show you that again. So I basically grabbed the work plane tool. It is now kind of glued to my cursor. And as I hover my cursor over these various spots, you can see that the work plane is trying to snap and sort of stick itself to the surface. So what I want to do is say, okay, where do I want to place this first flower? Right there. So now look what happens. So now my work plane has been temporarily relocated to the top of this sphere, a cylinder, right at about the 12 o'clock point. So what I can do now is I can grab this, I can just control Z cut this, and when I control V paste this, look, it's now sitting right in line where I want to place it. So all I have to worry about doing now is just putting it in the right location, which is right there. So one thing to comment here, you notice that I had told you to set the width of this ring to be where you wanted it, but now I've just created a flower that overhangs. This is really just a guide. It's a guide to really show you where is 5 millimeters in my case, or where is 5 millimeters? How wide is that? Can things overhang? Certainly. Should they? Yeah, probably. But this is really sort of like, this represents like the meat of the ring, the bulk of the ring. So that's just sort of, it's fine that it's overhanging. This is going to end up, the cylinder hole is going to end up being a cutter that slices through the entire finished piece to then ensure the ring fit is correct. One thing I will point out, let's navigate to the front view. So you see right now that you can see my work plane's kind of like at an angle a little bit. So you can see that right now my ring is hovering, or my flower detail is hovering. I actually want this to be colliding enough. Like basically, I want there to be some overlap here, because ideally, I want to have something to cut away. Right, all this material right there that's kind of grayed out will be cut away. So that's just the one thing that I would say. Just go back and make sure that you're doing that occasionally. Okay, so that is one way to use basic shapes to create a floral design. So if you're like, okay, well, that's cute, but it's like, it's a little chubby, it's a little sort of cookie cutter, it's a little cartoony. Let me show you some more advanced ways. So again, starting with that sphere, I'm actually just going to lock this for now as well. Actually, no, I'll leave it. So starting again with that sphere shape. So let's grab that. Let's do our same kind of scaling down process. I'm just going to move it over here so we can see everything on screen. So I am going to, again, start to reshape this and start to scale it down. And I know this is one that gave me a little trouble before. I'm actually just going to reset the work plane really quickly. I know this was one that gave me trouble before, that I cut it too thin, so I'm going to make it a little bit chunkier this time. So here's a really quick way to start to add some texture, add some nuance to your shapes. Take that shape, duplicate it, just move it out of the way. Turn one of these into a hole. So watch what I can do. I can now use this shape to be a cutter that cuts into the surface of my sphere petal. I'm actually just going to make this, let's see, that's 2 millimeters. So let's go 1.6. Oh, that's not the right size. 1.6. Okay. I'm just knowing that I'm cutting away a little bit. So I am going to start to intersect this with that sphere shape. And when you're looking at this, all of this gray area that is overlapped, that's what's getting cut away in this scenario. So you just kind of position it, just play around a little bit and see what kind of shapes you like. It's as simple as this. All right, let's try that. Group it together, cut away. Well, that's interesting. Maybe I need to actually make this a little bit wider to really cut some of this. You can use tools like Align, where you can align the centers. And that was that tool up in the upper corner, so that you can ensure that it's symmetrical. I actually really love when these petals are like a little asymmetrical. It just looks more like life, right? Like what flowers are actually perfectly symmetrical. So group it. So now you have a petal that now has a little bit of dimension to it. If you say, I want to take this 1 degree further, I want to make this look like it's really got like a lot of motion to it. It's irregular shaped. Maybe I don't love how dense all of this is in the center. I want this to be a little bit more airy. Here's a cool tool to show you, Scribble. So Scribble looks just like a scribble, but this is basically a tool where you can draw your own geometry. And so in this case, I'm going to be trying to draw a sort of cutting shape, a cutter shape. And I'm not really caring that if it's perfect or not. In fact, I would prefer it to be more irregular. But that's a pen tool that I just used. There's also this sort of like magic wand selection tool that allows you to fill in a lot of very quickly fill in geometry so that you don't have these holes. And then watch what happens. So I hit done. I'm going to scale this way, way down. I'm going to change it to be a hole as well. And I'm going to use this to actually cut away. Let me just move this down to the ground plane so we can see what we're doing. I'm actually going to cut away some of this side area. And so what I'm looking at right now is I'm looking at these little cutouts. And so I'm noticing that I've got some sharp edges right there, but that's fine. If I want to revise that, I can go in and I can reshape this. So say I'm like, okay, it was really this area that needed to be a little bit more soft in its transition. And this area needed to be a little bit more soft in its transition. Go back to my top view, see how I've modified that. Yeah, so let's just see what that looks like. I can scale it down a little bit. Move it. And this is like a really back and forth kind of process. So I group it. I see what it looks like. Interesting. Okay. So you might be looking at this and being like, you're crazy. There's all these sharp edges right here. Remember, this is such a tiny detail right here. It's so small. And all of these sharp edges are really going to get polished down if you choose to have this fabricated in a metal that has a polished finish. So brass, bronze, sterling silver, always have the option of going the polished finish, which is what you would expect to see in like a high shine jewelry. So I'm actually going to just do one more little change. Pull this in right there. But you can really edit this sort of back and forth real time. Okay, yeah, that's what we're looking for. So let's group this together. So now I have a sort of nice little cupped petal right here, and that's going to be really, really textural and lovely when it's fabricated. So this is just again to kind of like quickly build out that petal, like the flower from here. I'm going to start to like add these petals, put them into their place here. I might sort of play with the size a little bit. In this case, so you can do the typical Control C, Control V as a copy and paste if you don't want to use the duplicate tool as well. So one thing I might do is actually stretch one of these guys out. And this is to me reads kind of like a peony, I think. I think this has got a little peony about it. So I actually might lift a couple of these. So, and one thing I found when I first got started in this process of building these like floral components is that things like I was just really trying to like spend a lot of time making these perfect. When I'm like working this close, this sort of zoomed in. But then as soon as you actually fabricate this, you just realize that like so many of these little details that you fuss about are just like they don't show up at all. So, I guess my meaning is don't like fret, don't spend too much time like worrying about it. So like that's kind of a pretty shape right there. In this case, maybe I want to do kind of a weird center shape, like a reverse, like little cupped center shape. And actually, I'm feeling like this is like a really nice flower, and I'm not even loving the last one that I did. So you can see how the imperfect stuff is really gives the piece a lot of character. So I'm going to do this here, but I'm going to do that cutting trick where I duplicate it. I raise it up, turn it into a hole, make it a little bit smaller. And now I'm actually looking to sort of intersect here and make this sort of in your regular little blip. When I cut that out. So there you go. So super cute. So yeah, so let's call that one done, group it together, give it a second. And so again, let's go to that work plane and drop that work plane somewhere on the cylinder hole. Now keep in mind, as you start to place these objects, you need these, if you are going to go with my original concept that I showed you, where it's really like individual floral components that are merged together, but there's holes and kind of cutouts throughout. You do need to be cautious that you are in fact overlapping these. So I'm actually going to use this little white cone guide as like a good placement guide for myself. So, whoa, that looks crazy. So I'm going to Control X to cut and Control V to paste. And so now you can see that it hasn't rotated it, but it's now placing it, it's trying to place it. And actually, let's just see if we can do this. I haven't really tried this that much. Yeah, so it's moving it along the work plane. And so I'm able to get it into that position a lot more easily. And I'm gonna rotate it here. And the last thing I need to do is to rotate it this way because again, the flower itself was built in the original work plane, so it's running perpendicular to that. So I just am manually kind of positioning it here. So, so yeah, so you can see this is what I mean by the collision points right there. Now that's a lot of collision. You could stand for less collision. I'm going to use maybe the arrows to kind of just give it a little bit more breathing room. I might actually set my work plane back and move this down a little bit more just to have this guy sitting on top. Yeah. So there's your second flower. Okay, so you can see how fast this really comes together. And then the next kind of thing that I want to show you is that, so in reality, not all, so you're going to probably need more elements than just flowers. If you wanted to take these two objects and literally just like pattern them, repeat them around, go for it. But if you want more, like a lot of texture, a lot of like little tiny filigree details, you need to probably be building things more than building other objects outside of just flowers, because you're limited to how small you can make those because of the sheer detail involved in them. So what I found, I really love making these like little kind of blobby shapes, and I'll show you what I mean by that. So I'm going to grab a half sphere, and I'm using a half sphere because I'm really just looking for like a foundation that I can then start building other objects on. So I'm just kind of roughly scaling that down. So then what I'm going to actually do here is I am going to take, what object do I want to use? You know what? Let's try this heart. This is crazy. I haven't tried this heart yet. So let's actually just grab this heart, scale this down to 1 millimeter. It's nice and flat. And then just start to really get it pretty small. So this is like kind of, I think, going to end up looking a little bit maybe like a flower, even though I really didn't really mean it to look like a flower. But so I'm basically just sort of positioning this little heart detail right onto this sphere. So I'm going to go ahead and now just copy and paste it, grab the next one, rotate it. Really don't have a plan here. I'm just kind of going for it. I think actually this is going to end up looking quite a bit like a flower, even though I was trying to show you a non-flower, but that's okay. Let's just go with it. So I'm just cutting and pasting as we go. Actually, let's rotate a couple of these. Let's see here. So you'll notice right now, as I'm trying to rotate this, I'm actually going to flatten it back out first to rotate it because otherwise it skews it pretty badly. Yeah, there we go. And now I'm going to go back and rotate that sort of angled position. So you have to kind of go back and forth a little bit. So here I'm just going to copy and paste, rotate this around. I think I'm actually going to really collide these together just to make this like very dense kind of like little, it's kind of like a daisy, isn't it? Or something. Oh, it's kind of fun. Never sure what you're going to come up with. So here's a quick way to add some more layers to it. So duplicate all those, copy and paste, move them quite a bit down, use the arrows to move them over, scale them all up. Wow, okay, I definitely just made a flower. I told you that I wasn't going to do that, and then I just did exactly that same thing. So that's okay. Now you have a bonus flower. Also, see how like I'm having a hard time grabbing this rotational arc? That seems to happen sometimes. So if you need to, just like type in manual commands. This does this when it's a small object and you're really zoomed in. So I'm just kind of manual. Okay, there we go. I like that. So at this point, I am now just creating these little overlaps. And yeah, I completely created a flower right there, but that's okay. We'll go back and I'll show you a different method. So may as well just finish this out. I actually kind of really love this little textural. It's like a carnation maybe. Yeah, it's kind of cute. Okay, so let's just really fast group this. Put it into position. So just be aware, I have the urge to scale this down, but I really cannot do that because I sized all these little heart components as 1 millimeter thickness, which is like right on the brink of being, printable. So going back to that work plane, I'm going to drop it here. I'm going to cut, paste, and then just going to relocate it to be like roughly. So I'm actually going to give myself some space right here. And then this will set us up nicely for the next part of this conversation. This work plane is so crazy when it's sitting like that. So I'm going to really give this a nice overlap right there. Just position that. Okay, so let me see if I can actually get myself to show you what I had intended to show you. And that was to create objects that are really not flowers. So one thing is, it's great. I'm just going to go back to that sphere. One thing that I really love that I find to be a nice filler is these little beads. So beads are used in jewelry often. They're used to mimic prongs. They're just really teeny tiny little beads, little circles or spheres that add texture, make things look like it's like a way of doing like faux pave. So I'm just actually going to just use I know I'm going for a millimeter here, so I'm just going to go with a millimeter and type it in right there. Okay, so I have this 1 millimeter teeny tiny little bead. And I'm going to, again, do that work plane thing right there. Actually, I don't need to do that because this is just an even sphere. So I'm just going to rotate this in place or reposition it in place. So one thing that you can do is as you have these little remainder spaces, these little gaps in here, where you're like, ooh, I need something in there, but I can't really fit an object, throw in some of these beads. Make sure that you're colliding them with something because otherwise you're not going to have success in fabricating. But these are great little filler details that start to add a lot of like interest. This is actually floating. That start to add a lot of texture really, really quickly. So you can I do like little clusters of beads. So really you can see here that the time consuming process is really just filling in all this information, all these designs, all these details. And you can really spend a lot of time doing that. And at this point, if you're like, oh, you know what, actually, I think I need to position things. Like I like to leave these all ungrouped and even like change them to be different colors so that I can kind of clearly see where one object is in relation to the other object. Oops. But it's this really kind of like back and forth sort of push and pull process. And you will likely want to move things as you go. That's totally fine. That's why we don't group anything until the very end. So you can really be modifying. So see now here, I should probably add a bead like right there. And that's like a really nice connection to stabilize these two objects together. Oops. My little arrow go, there he is. And you just, again, want to make sure that these beads are touching both objects. If they're not, if I'm like, that's not really touching, that's all right. Just modify, stretch it out a little bit. It doesn't have to be a perfect circle. Then you want to rotate it. Move things down. So you can really see this sort of like back and forth part of this process. Okay, so moving on, other funny little shapes. So let's talk about leaves and like stems and vines, right? So that's a great one to incorporate so it's not all just flowers. So using Scribble, again, going back to that tool where you can draw. So this is like a really nice way to create leaf shapes. And thinking about how small that's going to be. I don't want any areas to be, dramatically too skinny. This area is probably going to be way too skinny. Just kind of smooth this out. Use my magic fill tool. That's what I'm going to call it, the magic fill tool. Okay. Just maybe fix this. If you want to add a little cutout, you can use the erase tool. Now this area might be too skinny. Actually, let me undo that and put this cut further down here. Probably too skinny as well. Let's see what that looks like on there. You can always revise it. That's the beauty of it. So scaling this way down, let's just place this at like 2 millimeters so I can make sure that I intersect nicely with the ring body. This looks like a yeah, I'm going to edit this. Not loving these cuts. Oops. So the one thing I will say while I'm doing this is that this would be a great chance to import SVG files. And I actually, I'm going to just show you how to do that anyway. But if you're online and you find some clip art or like an illustration, or you sketch your own illustration, you can import that as import an SVG file that you would convert, like if you were to like draw something in like a Sharpie or a black pen on a white paper, and then you were to convert, like take a photo with your phone, email it to yourself, and then use an online converter to convert into an SVG file instead of a JPEG. You could import that SVG file as geometry, and I've got an example that I could show you really fast. It's not a flower though, but that's okay. So use our work plane tool, maybe place that right there, cut, paste, and let's just move that roughly here. I'm going to have to reorient it and move it into the ring intersection. Okay. So now you can kind of see, oh, there's like a little like leaf shape right here. I think I actually am kind of upside down. That might be the way to go. So again, here is like, oop, that's sticking out a little bit. It's okay. I'm just going to raise that up. It's better. Yeah. Okay. So work plane back to normal. One thing you could do is, this is a very flat surface. You could also create different shapes. So let me try another one and actually shape it and show you how to create a compound cutter. So what is this shape going to be? Maybe this is going to be me attempting to do a more abstract, oops, let's see, much smaller. One thing that I find is very helpful is if you're making small details, to draw them very small, because that then helps you avoid having these like super skinny areas that you then like really can't fabricate. So here's a very, very, very simple little flower shape, kind of comical flower shape. But watch what you can do with this. So just going to make this like 3 millimeters to start, and then really scale this way down. Make that a bit taller. Okay, so little cute little like chubby adorable little flower. It's very flat on top. So I love creating these like compound cutting objects to shape the top. So what does that mean? So if I take a box, this box is huge, small box, place it over the flower. Then, actually just going to move this out of the way for the moment. So then I'm going to take a sphere or some shape that I want to use to cut, to shape the surface of this little flower. So I'm going to just scale this down a bit, but I still want to leave this kind of large, and you'll see why in a second. So I'm going to change it to be a hole as well. I'm actually just going to move this here over the top. So what I'm looking at right now, I am looking at, let me just go to the right view so I can show you. Okay. So I am looking at centering my sphere cutting tool over the top here. And and I'm looking at this top shape right there. So actually, I think I want to make this a little bit smaller so I have more of a curve. And I also want to make it a little bit taller so that I have more of a curve. So right now I'm looking at this shape right here. So what I want is I want to use this cutter, this hole, to shape the surface. And actually, I think I'm going to go even smaller than that. I'm just going to move this box for a second. I'm just going to align these so I know that I'm centered, maximizing the curvature. Now, right view, move this up. Okay, so here's what we're looking for. I am looking to cut off all of this area. So how do I do that? Because if I cut this now, I'm going to cut off the wrong part, and I'll have the flower cupping towards the ground, not sort of like a dome. So what I can do, I can select these two objects, the two cutting objects, center point align them, and then I now am going to turn this object back into a solid, cut these two objects or group these two together, and now turn that into a hole. So now I have resulted with the shape that I want to cut. So I'm going to align them again. And then move this box into place. So now you can see that this gray area is what I want to cut off. So that's how you can kind of create a compound cutter, meaning that it's a hole, but it's a hole that you've created by combining objects. So now when I group these together, oh, cute. Look at this cute little, like now it's more like a flower, not like a cookie cutter. So, and here you could get a little cute with the style of sort of center or stamen that you do. I think this is going to end up being a little like hibiscus type shape. I may actually make that smaller even. I might make this a little bigger. And then raise that up and look. We have this like kind of this cute little chubby hibiscus. I love it. I might actually just group those together or align these. Yeah. Okay. So one thing I do need to do is I probably need to make this shorter. So let me just shorten that down now and then move this down as well. All right, group those. Change the color just to stay with it. And then plop that down somewhere over here. So work plane, cut, paste, drag it into place on my work plane, rotate it, and then move it so that it nicely collides. Cute. Look at how cute that is. Maybe move it a bit so that it's not like right in the way. Although now I have it floating, so I'm going to have to decide how I want to attach these. And I think in this case, I am going to use some more of these little spheres to kind of attach these areas to each other. So really kind of, I would definitely recommend like getting a feel for using the work plane tool because it really helps you position things much more quickly than you would be able to if you were just moving it in space. It's a little weird of a tool to get used to at first, but once you are, you're like, oh man, this is so much better. Okay, just trying to get myself collided with the pink and the red objects. There we go. That's some collision right there. Okay, so, all right, so let's actually kind of show you how to wrap this up. So if you really are feeling good about this process and you just want to keep going, pretty wild with the design and do unique stuff all around, go for it. If, however, you're like, okay, that was enough freeform objects for me, you could copy and paste these and place them in more randomized patterns around this whole cylinder. Or if you want the really super, super shortcut, super fast trick, just duplicate this. I grabbed everything, I duplicated all of it, and I'm just gonna use my arrows and just move it out of the way because these objects are all free floating right now. And I'm gonna move this all this together 90 degrees. So navigate to my front, use my arrows and move this into place. Oops. And then just kind of check from this view. Okay, great. And you always have the option, and you probably will need to actually move this more manually once you get things positioned. So don't go too crazy here. Like I can see that I have a massive collision right there, which I may or may not want. You can also, if you're like, ooh, well, I like that pattern. Well, fine, just change the position of it. Make it a little bit more random and avoid some of those collision areas. So see, that's more acceptable right there. Okay, and then again, these are all free objects. I've got them grouped, I've got them selected together. So I'm going to duplicate that again. Oh, wow. I don't know how it just did that. That was pretty fancy. That was some kind of witchcraft right there. That was lucky. I don't know why it did that, but thanks, Tinkercad. You kind of knew exactly what I was trying to do. So I'm just going to position things here. I actually really have to like look into why that did that because that was pretty amazing. Just aligning from the side. So now you can see I've basically finished this ring in just a few quick steps. So now I can say, oh, okay, well, let me actually just grab now these objects together. 3, duplicate them, move them out of the way so I can see what I'm working with, move them up. You know what? Maybe I actually rotate this whole thing around. So I love doing this. It's like the shortcut, and this will still look like, you've individually placed all of these things, and even though you haven't. Oops. And just at this point, it's probably easy to set your grid snap back to move more quickly. And I'm just really kind of eyeballing it right now. Okay, so at this point, you have some decisions to make. So you will need to kind of go around and look at where the collisions are, move things maybe as necessary, or swap out flowers if you're like, oh, I don't want those two items to be so close together. Maybe you swap them out for something else. You should also look for any major gaps and decide how you want to fill those holes if you want to fill them. In this case, I might just copy and paste this one and move him right over. Rotate it just so that it's a little bit less perfect looking. I think I've maybe sent that out of alignment a little bit. Move it back in. Oops. Your arrows can get a little chaotic when you're in this. As you change views, the arrows will kind of change what they do. So just kind of keep that in mind. So it's kind of cute. And then I would say that the last thing that you want to do, grab an object, sort of position it differently a little bit so that things are a little bit more randomized, if you like. And then definitely go back in and fill in spheres wherever you have any kind of loose, like small connection points. So actually, I think my connection points are looking pretty good here. Nothing seems really, so here's a good one. There's nothing connecting it right there. So I need to duplicate and move some spheres to connect these little things so that I make sure that I have a printable, castable model. I'm probably going to add another one right there, just to make sure I've got nice connections. Yeah, I think we're okay. At least for this process, we're okay. Okay, so finishing up your ring, once you've got all the details added. So remember how I said you if you don't know your ring size, or if you've been following my ring size and you're like, I'm definitely not a 6, that's fine. Once you know what your ring size is, or if you decide you want to change it, just go back and resize this. And then just hopefully you did a ring size smaller than you would need to do. I probably should have mentioned that. But you can always just hide this object as well, or delete it, and then grab all of this and scale it up if you need to scale it up, right? So that's always an option. So really the last step is that we want to just quickly hide this because we want to group all of this together just to make this a bit easier. So I'm going to select all of these objects. And actually, this is a great time to relook at everything because you can tell it's more overtly floating right now. But I'm actually like really happy with this, how this is turning out. So at this point, let's grab all of these objects. Let's group them together. And this is going to take a second. This actually can sometimes, because you've got so many pieces of geometry that are trying to calculate at the same time, this could end up not fully grouping for you, and then you're just like, what is going on? If that happens, just give it some time, but then exit back out of Tinkercad and go back in. Usually these kinds of glitches resolve themselves fairly quickly when you just reset. So another way to test this is to just grab and drag it. So see how now I'm dragging it? It should have changed all one color. It didn't. I can try, oh, there we go. So see how mine just caught up. So this is what you're looking for essentially to verify that it's all one object. So we are now going to show our ring cutter. What you want to do is now you don't necessarily need to have this at 5 millimeters anymore. In fact, you probably need this to be wider. It was only a guide to begin with. So now we're going to increase, increase the width of it so that it will cleanly cut through everything. Just once again, double check your ring sizes, 16.5, 16.5. Use the align tool to align the center points. Verify that your cylinder hole will cut cleanly through the whole ring, all the details, and go ahead and group. So while it's calculating, again, this is sort of a heavy file for it to calculate. So the last step that you would do if you decide to fabricate this would be to export it, which is up here in this corner. You would export as an STL or an OBJ file, and then you would load into Shapeways. And if you decide that you do want to try fabricating, please be sure to check out my video on which is a guide for how to use Shapeways if you've never used it, how to use the sort of tools. There we go. So now we see the final ring here. So just make sure to check it out because you definitely need to do some checks. And one thing I'm going to point out here, look at this. We could have some issues right in here. That could be an issue. And so in this case, if you see any of that when you cut away, you just might go back and actually move that, move something around or add a little connection point because that right there could be a bit of an issue. But so it can be a sort of iterative process. I would say at this point, I'm certainly going to go to Shapeways, load this in, do a model check, and see if there's any components that are just too thin to be safely made. And I'll go back and I'll edit that and I'll catch that little mistake that we pointed out. Otherwise, I'm really happy with this actually. So yeah, so that was the class modeling a floral ring. I hope you enjoyed it, and certainly reach out to me through my Instagram or through my website if you have any questions or you would like any specific guidance. Otherwise, thank you so much for joining me, and I hope you've enjoyed April sessions. All right, have a great day.